Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second segment of the day for our Jane Eyre Readathon. Thank you to all of our past performers. Thank you so much to our current performers. We appreciate you so much. And we also appreciate the Honresfeld Library and all of the treasures that are in that. We're here to try to save that and reunite those literary treasures with their homes in public museums and libraries and other public institutions. So we are raising funds with the Friends of the National Libraries. You can donate a pound or $1 or a penny, anything you can afford to give, to our GoFundMe or to the Friends of the National Libraries Big Give campaign. Links to both of those crowdfunding sources are available in our past videos, and I will add them onto this live stream video once it ends. So just look in the descriptions on our YouTube channel. We're trying to raise 15 million pounds. 100,000 pounds of that are what we are actually trying to get from crowdfunding. So please tell your friends, tell your family, do the YouTube thing where you like and subscribe to our channel, and spread the word about all of the wonderful 19th century literary documents, books, manuscripts that we're trying to save as part of this campaign. As part of the Bring the Brontes Home campaign, we are also hosting an auction of different bookish items, anything related to the Brontes, anything related to current authors. And if you would like to donate to that auction, you can use the Contact Us form that is available on our GoFundMe page. You can also tweet at us. We are at Bring Brontes Home, H-O-M, not H-O-M-E. Or you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Amber Elby, A-M-B-E-R-E-L-B-Y. And you can tell us what you'd like to donate. We will contact you. The auction will run July 3rd through July 10th. And we will have links to that on our social media channels also. And we'll make a video here about it as well. So we look forward to enjoying this experience with you, to sharing Jane Eyre. We are in the third act, or the third volume, however you want to look at it. Jane has had a very tumultuous life so far. Her childhood was traumatic. She thought she was happy in a place called Thornfield until she discovered that the man who she loved there had a little secret hidden upstairs. So that was where we were yesterday. This morning, we have seen Jane come into a new environment. She wandered through the moors and found refuge in a house with a young man named St. John. If you look in the novel, it looks like it's St. John, but it's St. John, and his sisters. And she was just offered employment as a school teacher. So that's where we're going to meet Jane now. Before we start with Jane's story, let's hear about our performers today. So Trisha, can you please tell us about you?
Hi, I'm Trisha. I've just finished writing a book about Emily Bronte's EJB Notebook of Poems, which is in the Honresfeld sale. So that's really exciting for me. My interesting fact is I live 2 miles from the house Honresfeld. And last year I was given the chance to have a whole morning just looking around it on my own, which was absolutely wonderful. And I spent quite a lot of time in the room that was the library.
Oh, it's so fantastic. It's so magical. How wonderful. So thank you for joining us. Stephanie, can you please go next?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Lynn Mason. I'm a New York City-based actress. Jane Eyre was the first long novel that I read when I was 12 years old, and it's always had such a special place in my heart. And I love the Brontes, so I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Amber, for having me, and I'm excited to do this.
Thank you so much. I love it when people who read this when they were younger come back to see it as adults, because there's a lot of things that have changed that you'll notice as you read, because you've changed too. And if you don't know the novel and this is all new to you, this is so exciting, because I love sharing this novel with people who've never experienced it before. So last but not least, we have Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Rockland. I'm an actress, writer, and first-person historical interpreter based in Boston, Massachusetts. And I first read Jane Eyre, I think when I was 13 or 14, and completely fell in love, and wrote my undergraduate thesis on spirituality in Charlotte Bronte's novels. And I've continued to study and work on the Brontes ever since. And so I am thrilled to be here and to be a part of raising money for this cause.
That is fantastic. Thank you. I love having Bronte fans. We do have to give a shout out to Branwell because yesterday was his birthday. And then also Emily and Anne. I have my Team Anne button on because I do love Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And I'm going to say that probably during every live stream. I'm Amber Elby. I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm a professor and an author. And I'm going to be cold reading St. John because we had a cancellation. It's not a huge deal. I cold read Shakespeare every week. So we'll see where this goes, but keep in mind, I'm not a professional actor. A lot of our readers come from different levels. We have students, teachers, authors, scholars, and professional actors. So what we all share is a love of the Brontes, a love of 19th century literature, and a deep desire to have these treasures on public display. So we're so glad that you are here, our audience, and also our participants today. So thank you. Trisha, whenever you're ready to begin chapter 31, go ahead and take it away.
Chapter 31. My home then, when I at last find a home, is a cottage, a little room with whitewashed walls and a sanded floor, containing 4 painted chairs and a table, a clock, a cupboard with 2 or 3 plates and dishes, and a set of tea things in delf. Above, a chamber of the same dimensions as the kitchen, with a deal bedspread and a chest of drawers, small, yet too large to be filled with my scanty wardrobe, though the kindness of my gentle and generous friends has increased that by a modest stock of such things as are necessary. It is evening. I have dismissed, with the fee of an orange, the little orphan who serves me as a handmaid. I am sitting alone on the hearth. This morning, the village school opened. I had 20 scholars. But 3 of the number can read, none write or cipher, several knit and a few sew a little. They speak with the broadest accent of the district. At present, they and I have difficulty in understanding each other's language. Some of them are unmannered, rough, intractable, as well as ignorant, but others are docile, have a wish to learn, and evince a disposition that pleases me. I must not forget that these coarsely clad little peasants are of flesh and blood as good as the science of gentlest genealogy, and that the germs of native excellence, refinement, intelligence, kind feeling are as likely to exist in their hearts as in those of the best born. My duty will be to develop these germs. Surely I shall find some happiness in discharging that office. Much enjoyment I do not expect in the life opening before me. Yet it will doubtless, if I regulate my mind and exert my powers as I ought, yield me enough to live on from day to day. Was I very gleeful, settled, content during the hours I passed in yonder bare, humble schoolroom this morning and afternoon? Not to deceive myself, I must reply, no. I felt desolate to a degree. I felt, yes, idiot that I am, I felt degraded. I doubted I had taken a step which sank instead of raising me in the scale of social existence. I was weakly dismayed at the ignorance, the poverty, the coarseness of all I heard and saw round me. But let me not hate and despise myself too much for these feelings. I know them to be wrong. That is a great step gained. I shall strive to overcome them. Tomorrow, I trust, I shall get the better of them partially. And in a few weeks, perhaps they will be quite subdued. In a few months, it is possible the happiness of seeing progress and a change for the better in my scholars may substitute gratification for disgust. Meantime, let me ask myself one question. Which is better, to have surrendered to temptation, listened to passion, made no painful effort, no struggle, but to have sunk down in the silken snare, fallen asleep on the flowers covering it, wakened in a southern clime amongst the luxuries of a pleasure villa, to have been now living in France, Mr. Rochester's mistress, delirious with his love half my time, for he would, oh yes, he would have loved me well for a while. He did love me. No one will ever love me so again. I shall never more know the sweet homage given to beauty, youth, and grace, for never to anyone else shall I seem to possess these charms. He was fond and proud of me. It is what no man besides will ever be. But where am I wandering, and what am I saying, and above all, feeling? Whether is it better, I ask, to be a slave in a fool's paradise at Marseille, fevered with delusive bliss 1 hour, suffocating with the bitterest tears of remorse and shame the next, or to be a village schoolmistress, free and honest, in a breezy mountain nook in the healthy heart of England? Yes, I feel now that I was right when I adhered to principle and law and scorned and crushed the insane promptings of a frenzied moment. God directed me to a correct choice. I thank his providence for the guidance. Having brought my eventide musings to this point, I rose, went to my door and looked at the sunset of the harvest day and at the quiet fields before my cottage, which, with the school, was distant 1/2 mile from the village. The birds were singing their last strains. The air was mild, the dew was balm. While I looked, I thought myself happy and was surprised to find myself ere long weeping. And why? For the doom which had reft me from adhesion to my master. For him I was no more to see. For the desperate grief and fatal fury consequences of my departure, which might now perhaps be dragging him from the path of right, too far to leave hope of ultimate restoration thither. At this thought, I turned my face aside from the lovely sky of Eve and lonely vale of Morton. I say lonely, for in that bend of it visible to me, there was no building apparent, save the church and the parsonage, half hid in the trees. And quite at the extremity, the roof of Vale Hall, where the rich Mr. Oliver and his daughters lived. I hid my eyes and leant my head against the stone frame of my door. But soon, a slight noise near the wicket, which shut in my tiny garden from the meadow beyond it, made me look up. A dog. Old Carlo, Mr. Rivers' pointer, as I saw in a moment, was pushing the gate with his nose, and St. John himself leant upon it with folded arms, his brow knit, his gaze, grave almost to displeasure, fixed on me. I asked him to come in.
No, I cannot stay. I've only brought you a little parcel my sister's left for you. I think it contains a color box, pencils, and paper.
I approached to take it. A welcome gift it was. He examined my face, I thought with austerity as I came near. The traces of tears were doubtless very visible upon it.
Have you found your first day's work harder than you expected?
Oh no, on the contrary. I think in time I shall get on with my scholars very well.
But perhaps your accommodations, your cottage, your furniture have disappointed your expectations? They are in truth scanty enough, but...
My cottage is clean and weatherproof. My furniture sufficient and commodious. All I see has made me thankful, not despondent. I am not absolutely such a fool and sensualist as to regret the absence of a carpet, a sofa, and silver plate. Besides, 5 weeks ago, I had nothing. I was an outcast, a beggar, a vagrant. Now I have acquaintance, a home, a business. I wonder at the goodness of God, the generosity of my friends, the bounty of my lot. I do not repine.
But you feel solitude and oppression. The little house there behind you is dark and empty.
I have hardly had time yet to enjoy a sense of tranquility, much less to grow impatient under one of loneliness.
Very well. I hope you feel the content you express. At any rate, your good sense will tell you that it is too soon yet to yield to the vacillating fears of Lot's wife. What you had left before I saw you, of course, I do not know, but I counsel you to resist firmly every temptation which would incline you to look back. Pursue your present career steadily, for some months at least.
It is what I mean to do.
It is hard work to control the workings of inclination and turn the bent of nature, but that may be done. I know from experience, God has given us in a measure the power to make our own fate. And when our energies seem to demand a sustenance they cannot get, When our will strains after a path we may not follow, we need neither starve from inanition nor stand still in despair. We have but to seek another nourishment for the mind, as strong as the forbidden food it longed to taste, and perhaps purer, and to hew out for the adventurous foot a road as direct and broad as the one fortune has blocked us against, if rougher than it. A year ago, I was myself intensely miserable because I thought I had made a mistake in entering the ministry. Its uniform duties wearied me to death. I burnt for the more active life of the world, for the more exciting toils of a literary career, for the destiny of an artist, author, orator, anything rather than that of a priest. Yes, the heart of a politician, of a soldier, of a votary of glory, a lover of renown, a luster after power beat under my curate's surplice. I considered my life was so wretched it must be changed or I must die. After a season of darkness and struggling, light broke and relief fell. My cramped existence all at once spread out to a plain without bounds. My power heard a call from heaven to rise, gather their full strength, spread their wings, and mount beyond ken. God had an errand for me, to bear which afar, to deliver it well, skill and strength, courage, and eloquence, the best qualifications of a soldier, statesman, and orator were all needed. For these all center in the good missionary. A missionary I resolved to be. From that moment, my state of mind changed. The fetters dissolved and dropped from every faculty, leaving nothing of bondage but its galling soreness, which time only can heal. My father indeed imposed the determination, but since his death, I have not a legitimate obstacle to contend with. Some affairs settled, a successor for Morton provided, an entanglement or two of the feelings broken or cut asunder, a last conflict with human weakness in which I know I shall overcome, because I have vowed that I will overcome, and I will leave Europe for the East.
He said this in his peculiar, subdued yet emphatic voice, looking, when he'd finished speaking, not at me, but at the setting sun, at which I looked too. Both he and I had our backs towards the path leading up the field to the wicket. We had heard no step on that grass-grown track. The water running in the vale was the one lulling sound of the hour and scene. We might well then start, when a gay voice, sweet as a silver bell, exclaimed,
"Good evening, Mr. Rivers, and good evening, Carlo. Your dog is quicker to recognize his friends than you are, sir. He pricked his ears and wagged his tail when I was at the bottom of the field. And you have your back toward me now."
It was true. Though Mr. Rivers had started at the first of those musical accents, as if a thunderbolt had split a cloud over his head, he stood yet at the close of the sentence, in the same attitude in which the speaker had surprised him, his arm resting on the gate, his face directed towards the west. He turned at last with measured deliberation. A vision, as it seemed to me, had risen at his side. There appeared within 3 feet of him a form clad in pure white, a youthful, graceful form, full, yet fine in contour. And when, after bending to caress Carlo, it lifted up its head and threw back a long veil, there bloomed under his glance a face of perfect beauty. Perfect beauty is a strong expression, but I do not retrace or qualify it. As sweet features as ever the temperate clime of Albion moulded, as pure hues of rose and lily as ever her humid gales and vapoury skies generated and screened, justified, in this instance, the term. No charm was wanting, no defect was perceptible. The young girl had regular and delicate lineaments, eyes shaped and coloured as we see them in lovely pictures, large and dark and full. The long and shadowy eyelash, which encircles a fine eye with so soft a fascination, the pencil brow which gives such clearness, the white smooth forehead which adds such repose to the livelier beauties of tint and ray, the cheek oval, fresh and smooth, the lips fresh too, ruddy, healthy, sweetly formed, and the even and gleaming teeth without flaw, the small dimpled chin, the ornament of rich, plenteous tresses, all advantages, in short, were combined, realised the ideal of beauty were fully hers. I wondered, as I looked at this fair creature, I admired her with my whole heart. Nature had surely formed her in a partial mood, and forgetting her usual stinted stepmother dole of gifts, had endowed this, her darling, with a grand dame's bounty. What did St. John Rivers think of this earthly angel? I naturally asked myself that question as I saw him turn to her and look at her, and as naturally I sought the answer to the inquiry in his countenance. He had already withdrawn his eye from the Perry and was looking at a humble tuft of daisies which grew by the wicket.
A lovely evening, but late for you to be out alone,
he said, as he crushed the snowy heads of the closed flowers with his foot.
Oh, I only came home from Skipton this afternoon. Papa told me you'd opened your school and that the new mistress was come, and so I put on my bonnet after tea and ran up the valley to see her. This is she?
Pointing to me.
It is.
Do you think you shall like Morton?
She asked of me with a direct and naive simplicity of tone and manner, pleasing, if childlike.
I hope I shall. I have many inducements to do so.
Do you find your scholars as attentive as you expected?
Quite.
Do you like your house?
Very much.
Have I furnished it nicely?
Very nicely indeed.
And made a good choice of an attendant for you in Alice Wood?
You have indeed. She is teachable and handy.
This, then, I thought, is Miss Oliver, the heiress, favoured, it seemed, in the gifts of fortune as well as in those of nature. What happy combination of the planets presided over her birth, I wondered.
I shall come up and help you to teach sometimes. Well, it will be a change for me to visit you now and then, and I like a change. Mr. Rivers, I have been so gay during my stay at Skipton. Last night, or rather this morning, I was dancing till 2 o'clock. The 15th Regiment are stationed there since the riots, and the officers are the most agreeable men in the world. They put all your young knife grinders and scissor merchants to shame.
It seemed to me that Mr. St. John's underlip protruded, and his upper lip curled a moment. His mouth certainly looked a good deal compressed, and the lower part of his face unusually stern and square, as the laughing girl gave him this information. He smiled. He lifted his gaze too from the daisies and turned it on her. An unsmiling, a searching, a meaning gaze it was. She answered it with a second laugh, and laughter well became her youth, her roses, her dimples, her bright eyes. As he stood mute and grave, she again fell to caressing Carlo.
Poor Carlo loves me. He is not stern and distant to his friends. If he could speak, he would not be silent.
As she patted the dog's head, bending with native grace before his young and austere master, I saw a glow rise to that master's face. I saw his solemn eye melt with sudden fire and flicker with resistless emotion. Flushed and kindled thus, he looked nearly as beautiful for a man as she for a woman. His chest heaved once, as if his large heart, weary of despotic constriction, had expanded despite the will and made a vigorous bound for the attainment of liberty. But he curbed it, I think, as a resolute rider would curb a rearing steed. He responded neither by word nor movement to the gentle advances made him.
Papa says you never come to see us now. You are quite a stranger at Vale Hall. He is alone all this evening and not very well. Will you return with me and visit him?
It is not a seasonable hour to intrude on Mr. Oliver.
Not a seasonable hour, but I declare it is. It is just the hour when Papa most wants company, when the works are closed and he has no business to occupy him. Now, Mr. Rivers, do come. Why are you so very shy and so very sombre?
She filled up the hiatus his silence left by a reply of her own.
Oh, I forgot.
She exclaimed, shaking her beautiful curled head as if shocked at herself.
I am so giddy and thoughtless. Do excuse me. It had slipped my memory that you've good reasons to be indisposed for joining in my chatter. Diana and Mary have left you, and Moor House is shut up. And you are so lonely. I am sure I pity you. Do come and see Papa.
Not tonight, Miss Rosamond. Not tonight.
Mr. St. John spoke almost like an automaton. Himself only knew the effort it cost him thus to refuse.
Well, if you are so obstinate, I will leave you, for I dare not stay any longer. The dew begins to fall. Good evening.
She held out her hand. He just touched it.
Good evening,
he repeated in a voice low and hollow as an echo. She turned, but in a moment returned.
Are you well?
Well might she put the question. His face was blanched as her gown.
Quite well,
he enunciated, and with a bow he left the gate. She went one way, he another. She turned twice to gaze after him as she tripped fairy-like down the field. He, as he strode firmly across, never turned at all. This spectacle of another's suffering and sacrifice rapt my thoughts from exclusive meditation on my own. Diana Rivers had designated her brother inexorable as death. She had not exaggerated. Chapter 32. I continued the labours of the village school as actively and as faithfully as I could. It was truly hard work at first. Some time elapsed before, with all my efforts, I could comprehend my scholars and their nature. Wholly untaught, with faculties quite torpid, they seemed to me hopelessly dull, and at first sight all dull alike. But I soon found I was mistaken. There was a difference amongst them, as amongst the educated, and when I got to know them, and they me, this difference rapidly developed itself. Their amazement at me, my language, my rules and ways once subsided, I found some of these heavy-looking, gaping rustics wake up into sharp-witted girls enough. Many showed themselves obliging and amiable too, and I discovered amongst them not a few examples of natural politeness and innate self-respect, as well as of excellent capacity that won both my goodwill and my admiration. These soon took a pleasure in doing their work well, in keeping their persons neat, in learning their tasks regularly, in acquiring quiet and orderly manners. The rapidity of their progress in some instances was even surprising, and an honest and happy pride I took in it. Besides, I began personally to like some of the best girls, and they liked me. I had, amongst my scholars, several farmers' daughters, young women grown almost. They could already read, write and sew, and to them I taught the elements of grammar, geography, history, and the finer kinds of needlework. I found estimable characters amongst them, characters desirous of information and disposed for improvement, with whom I passed many a pleasant evening hour in their own homes. Their parents then, the farmer and his wife, loaded me with attentions. There was an enjoyment in accepting their simple kindness and in repaying it by a consideration, a scrupulous regard to their feelings, to which they were not perhaps at all times accustomed, and which both charmed and benefited them, because while it elevated them in their own eyes, it made them emulous to merit the deferential treatment they received. I felt I became a favourite in the neighbourhood. Whenever I went out, I heard on all sides cordial salutations, and was welcomed with friendly smiles. To live amidst general regard, though it be but the regard of working people, is like sitting in sunshine, calm and sweet. Serene inward feelings bud and bloom under the ray. At this period of my life, my heart far oftener swelled with thankfulness than sank with dejection. And yet, reader, to tell you all, in the midst of this calm, this youthful existence, after a day passed in honourable exertion amongst my scholars, an evening spent in drawing or reading contentedly alone, I used to rush into strange dreams at night, dreams many-coloured, agitated, full of the ideal, the stirring, the stormy, dreams where, amidst unusual scenes charged with adventure, with agitating risk and romantic chance, I still again and again met Mr. Rochester. always at some exciting crisis, and then the sense of being in his arms, hearing his voice, meeting his eye, touching his hand and cheek, loving him, being loved by him, the hope of passing a lifetime at his side would be renewed with all its first force and fire. Then I awoke. Then I recalled where I was and how situated. Then I rose up on my curtainless bed, trembling and quivering, and then the still dark night witnessed the convulsion of despair and heard the burst of passion. By 9 o'clock the next morning, I was punctually opening the school, tranquil, settled, prepared for the steady duties of the day. Rosamond Oliver kept her word in coming to visit me. Her call at the school was generally made in the course of her morning ride. She would canter up to the door on her pony, followed by a mounted livery servant. Anything more exquisite than her appearance in her purple habit, with her Amazon's cap of black velvet placed gracefully upon the long curls that kissed her cheek and floated to her shoulders, can scarcely be imagined. And it was thus she would enter the rustic building and glide through the dazzled ranks of the village children. She generally came at the hour when Mr. Rivers was engaged in giving his daily catechizing lesson. Keenly, I fear, did the eye of the visitress pierce the young pastor's heart. A sort of instinct seemed to warn him of her entrance, even when he did not see it, and when he was looking quite away from the door. If she appeared at it, his cheek would glow, and his marble-seeming features, though they refused to relax, changed indescribably, and in their very quiescence became expressive of a repressed fervour, stronger than working muscle or darting glance could indicate. Of course, she knew her power. Indeed, he did not, because he could not, conceal it from her. In spite of his Christian stoicism, when she went up and addressed him and smiled gaily, encouragingly, even fondly in his face, his hand would tremble and his eye burn. He seemed to say with his sad and resolute look, if he did not say it with his lips,
I love you, and I know you prefer me. It is not despair of success that keeps me dumb. If I offered my heart, I believe you would accept it. But that heart is already laid on a sacred altar. The fire is arranged around it. It will soon be no more than a sacrifice consumed.
And then she would pout like a disappointed child. A pensive cloud would soften her radiant vivacity. She would withdraw her hand hastily from his and turn in transient petulance from his aspect, at once so heroic and so martyr-like. St. John, no doubt, would have given the world to follow, recall, retain her when she thus left him, but he would not give one chance of heaven, nor relinquish, for the Elysium of her love, one hope of the true eternal paradise. Besides, he could not bind all that he had in his nature, the rover, the aspirant, the poet, the priest, in the limits of a single passion. He could not, he would not renounce his wild field of mission warfare for the parlours and the peace of Vale Hall. I learnt so much from himself in an inroad I once, despite his reserve, had the daring to make on his confidence. Miss Oliver already honoured me with frequent visits to my cottage. I had learnt her whole character, which was without mystery or disguise. She was coquettish, but not heartless, exacting, but not worthlessly selfish. She'd been indulged from her birth, but she was not absolutely spoilt. She was hasty, but good-humoured, vain. She could not help it when every glance in the glass showed her such a flush of loveliness, but not affected. Liberal-handed, innocent of the pride of wealth, ingenuous, sufficiently intelligent, gay, lively, and unthinking. She was very charming, in short, even to a cool observer of her own sex like me, but she was not profoundly interesting or thoroughly impressive. A very different sort of mind was hers from that, for instance, of the sisters of St. John. Still, I liked her almost as I liked my pupil Adele, except that for a child whom we have watched over and taught, a closer affection is engendered than we can give an equally attractive adult acquaintance. She had taken an amiable caprice to me. She said I was like Mr. Rivers, only certainly she allowed...
Not 1/10 so handsome, though you are a nice, neat little soul enough. But he is an angel.
I was, however, good, clever, composed, and firm like him. I was a lusus naturae, she affirmed, as a village schoolmistress. She was sure my previous history, if known, would make a delightful romance. One evening, with her usual childlike activity and thoughtless yet not offensive inquisitiveness, she was rummaging the cupboard and the table drawer of my little kitchen. She discovered first 2 French books, a volume of Schiller, a German grammar and dictionary, and then my drawing materials and some sketches, including a pencil head of a pretty little cherub-like girl, one of my scholars, and sundry views from nature, taken in the Vale of Morton and on the surrounding moors. She was first transfixed with surprise, and then electrified with delight.
Did you do these pictures? Do you know French and German? What a love! What a miracle! You draw better than my master in the first school in Scarborough. Would you sketch a portrait of me to show to Papa?
With pleasure,
I replied, and I felt a thrill of artist delight at the idea of copying from so perfect and radiant a model. She had then on a dark blue silk dress. Her arms and her neck were bare. Her only ornament was her chestnut tresses, which waved over her shoulders with all the wild grace of natural curls. I took a sheet of fine cardboard and drew a careful outline. I promised myself the pleasure of colouring it, and, as it was getting late then, I told her she must come and sit another day. She made such a report of me to her father that Mr. Oliver himself accompanied her next evening, a tall, massive-featured, middle-aged and grey-headed man, at whose side his lovely daughter looked like a bright flower near a hoary turret. He appeared a taciturn and perhaps a proud personage, but he was very kind to me. The sketch of Rosamond's portrait pleased him highly. He said I must make a finished picture of it. He insisted, too, on my coming the next day to spend the evening at Vale Hall. I went. I found it a large, handsome residence, showing abundant evidences of wealth in the proprietor. Rosamond was full of glee and pleasure all the time I stayed. Her father was affable, and when he entered into conversation with me after tea, he expressed in strong terms his approbation of what I had done in Morton School, and said he only feared from what he saw and heard I was too good for the place and would soon quit it for one more suitable.
Indeed, she is clever enough to be a governess in a high family, Papa.
I thought I would far rather be where I am than in any high family in the land. Mr. Oliver spoke of Mr. Rivers, of the Rivers family, with great respect. He said it was a very old name in the neighbourhood, that the ancestors of the house were wealthy, that all Morton had once belonged to them, that even now he considered the representative of that house might, if he liked, make an alliance with the best. He accounted it a pity that so fine and talented a young man should have formed the design of going out as a missionary. It was quite throwing a valuable life away. It appeared then that her father would throw no obstacle in the way of Rosamond's union with St. John. Mr. Oliver evidently regarded the young clergyman's good birth, old name, and sacred profession as sufficient compensation for the want of fortune. It was the 5th of November and a holiday. My little servant, after helping me to clean my house, was gone, well satisfied with the fee of a penny for her aid. All about me was spotless and bright, scoured floor, polished grate, and well-rubbed chairs. I had also made myself neat, and had now the afternoon before me to spend as I would. The translation of a few pages of German occupied an hour. Then I got my palette and pencils and fell to the more soothing, because easier, occupation of completing Rosamond Oliver's miniature. The head was finished already. There was but the background to tint and the drapery to shade off. a touch of carmine too to add to the ripe lips, a soft curl here and there to the tresses, a deeper tinge to the shadow of the lash under the azured eyelid. I was absorbed in my execution of these nice details when, after one rapid tap, my door unclosed, admitting St. John Rivers.
I'm come to see how you're spending your holiday. Not, I hope, in thought. No, that as well. While you draw, you will not feel lonely. You see, I mistrust you still. Though you have borne up wonderfully so far, I've brought a book for evening solace.
And he laid on the table a new publication, a poem, one of those genuine productions so often vouchsafed to the fortunate public of those days, the golden age of modern literature. Alas, the readers of our era are less favoured. But courage! I will not pause either to accuse or repine. I know poetry is not dead, nor genius lost, nor has mammon gained power over either to bind or slay. They will both assert their existence, their presence, their liberty and strength again one day. Powerful angels, safe in heaven. They smile when sordid souls triumph and feeble ones weep over their destruction. Poetry destroyed? Genius banished? No. Mediocrity? No. Do not let envy prompt you to the thought. No, they not only live, but reign and redeem. And without their divine influence spread everywhere, you would be in hell, the hell of your own meanness. While I was eagerly glancing at the bright pages of Marmion, for Marmion it was, St. John stooped to examine my drawing. His tall figure sprang erect again with a start. He said nothing. I looked up at him. He shunned my eye. I knew his thoughts well and could read his heart plainly. At the moment, I felt calmer and cooler than he. I had then temporarily the advantage of him, and I conceived an inclination to do him some good, if I could.
With all his firmness and self-control, thought I, he tasks himself too far, locks every feeling in pangs within, expresses, confesses, imparts nothing. I am sure it would benefit him to talk a little about this sweet Rosamond, who he thinks he ought not to marry. I will make him talk.
I said first.
Take a chair, Mr. Rivers.
But he answered, as he always did, that he could not stay.
Very well.
I responded mentally.
Stand if you like, but you shall not go just yet. I am determined. Solitude is at least as bad for you as it is for me. I'll try, and if I cannot discover the secret spring of your confidence and find an aperture in that marble breast through which I can shed one drop of the balm of sympathy. Is this portrait like?
I asked bluntly.
Like whom? I did not observe it closely.
You did, Mr. Rivers.
He almost started at my sudden and strange abruptness. He looked at me astonished. Oh, that is nothing yet, I muttered within. I don't mean to be baffled by a little stiffness on your part. I'm prepared to go to considerable lengths, I continued. You observed it closely and distinctly, but I have no objection to your looking at it again. I rose and placed it in his hand.
A well-executed picture, very soft, clear coloring, very graceful and correct drawing.
Yes, I know all that, but what of the resemblance? Who is it like?
Mastering some hesitation, he answered.
Miss Oliver, I presume?
Of course. And now, sir, to reward you for the accurate guess, I will promise to paint you a careful and faithful duplicate of this very picture, provided you admit that the gift would be acceptable to you. I don't wish to throw away my time and trouble on an offering you would deem worthless.
He continued to gaze at the picture. The longer he looked, the firmer he held it, the more he seemed to covet it. It is like, he murmured.
The eye is well managed. The color, light, expression are perfect. Smiles.
Would it comfort, or would it wound you to have a similar painting? Tell me that. And when you were at Madagascar or at the Cape or in India, would it be a consolation to have that memento in your possession? Would the sight of it bring recollections calculated to enervate and distress?
He now furtively raised his eyes. He glanced at me, irresolute. Disturbed, he again surveyed the picture.
That I should like to have it, it is certain. Whether it would be judicious or wise is another question.
Since I had ascertained that Rosamond really preferred him and that her father was not likely to oppose the match, I, less exalted in my views than St. John, had been strongly disposed in my own heart to advocate their union. It seemed to me that should he become the possessor of Mr. Oliver's large fortune, he might do as much good with it as if he went and laid his genius out to wither and his strength to waste under a tropical sun. With this persuasion, I now answered,
As far as I can see, it would be wiser and more judicious if you were to take to yourself the original at once.
By this time he had sat down. He had laid the picture on the table before him, and with his brow supported on both hands, hung fondly over it. I discerned he was now neither angry nor shocked at my audacity. I saw even that to be thus frankly addressed on a subject he had deemed unapproachable, to hear it thus freely handled was beginning to be felt by him as a new pleasure, an unhoped-for relief. Reserved people often really need the frank discussion of their sentiments and griefs more than the expansive. The sternest seeming stoic is human after all, and to burst with boldness and goodwill into the silent sea of their souls is often to confer on them the first of obligations.
She likes you, I'm sure,
said I as I stood behind his chair.
And her father respects you. Moreover, she is a sweet girl, rather thoughtless, but you would have sufficient thought for both yourself and her. You ought to marry her.
Does she like me?
Certainly. Better than she likes anyone else. She talks of you continually. There is no subject she enjoys so much or touches upon so often.
It is very pleasant to hear this. Very. Go on for another quarter of an hour.
And he actually took out his watch and laid it upon the table to measure the time.
But where is the use of going on? When you are probably preparing some iron blow or contradiction, or forging a fresh chain to fetter your heart.
St. John.
Such hard things. Fancy me yielding and melting, as I am doing. Human love rising like a freshly opened fountain in my mind and overflowing with sweet inundation all the field I have so carefully and with such labor prepared, so assiduously sown with the seeds of good intentions, of self-denying plans. And now it is deluged with a nectarous flood, the young germs swamped, delicious poison cankering them. Now I see myself stretched on an ottoman in the drawing room at Vale Hall at my bride Rosamond Oliver's feet. She is talking to me with her sweet voice, gazing down on me with those eyes your skillful hand has copied so well, smiling at me with these coral lips. She is mine and I am hers. This present life and passing world will suffice me. Hush, say nothing. My heart is full of delight. My senses are entranced. Let the time I marked pass in peace.
I humoured him. The watch ticked on. He breathed fast and low. I stood silent. Amidst this hush, the quartet sped. He replaced the watch, laid the picture down, rose, and stood on the hearth.
Now that little space was given to delirium and delusion. I rested my temples on the breast of temptation and put my neck voluntarily under her yoke of flowers. I tasted her cup. The pillow was burning. There is an asp in the garland. The wine has a bitter taste. Her promises are hollow, her offers false. I see and know all this.
I gazed at him in wonder.
It is strange that while I love Rosamund Oliver so wildly, with all the intensity, indeed, of a first passion, the object of which is exquisitely beautiful, graceful, fascinating, I experience at the same time a calm, unwarped consciousness that she would not make me a good wife, that she is not the partner suited to me, that I should discover this within a year after marriage, and that to 12 months rapture would succeed a lifetime in regret. I know this.
Strange indeed.
I could not help ejaculating.
While something in me is acutely sensible to her charms, something else is as deeply impressed with her defects. They are such that she could sympathize in nothing I aspire to, cooperate in nothing I undertook. Rosamund, a sufferer, a laborer, a female apostle? Rosamund, a missionary's wife? No.
But you need not be a missionary. You might relinquish that scheme.
Relinquish? What, my vocation, my great work, my foundation laid on earth for a mansion in heaven? My hopes of being numbered in the band who have merged all ambitions in the glorious one of bettering their race, of carrying knowledge into the realms of ignorance, of substituting peace for war, freedom for bondage, religion for superstition, the hope of heaven for the fear of hell? Must I relinquish that? It is dearer than the blood in my veins. It is what I have to look forward to and to live for.
After a considerable pause, I said,
And Miss Oliver, are her disappointment and sorrow of no interest to you?
Miss Oliver is ever surrounded by suitors and flatterers. In less than a month, my image will be effaced from her heart. She will forget me and will marry probably someone who will make her far happier than I should do.
You speak coolly enough, but you suffer in the conflict. You're wasting away.
No. If I get a little thin, it is with anxiety about my prospects, yet unsettled. My departure, continually procrastinated. Only this morning, I received intelligence that the successor whose arrival I have been so long expecting cannot be ready to replace me for 3 months to come. And yet perhaps the 3 months may extend to 6.
You tremble and become flushed whenever Miss Oliver enters the schoolroom.
again, the surprised expression crossed his face. He had not imagined that a woman would dare to speak so to a man. For me, I felt at home in this sort of discourse. I could never rest in communication with strong, discreet and refined minds, whether male or female, till I had passed the outworks of conventional reserve and crossed the threshold of confidence and won a place by their heart's very hearthstone.
You are original and not timid. There's something brave in your spirit as well as penetrating in your eye, but allow me to assure you that you partially misinterpret my emotions. You think them more profound and potent than they are. You give me a larger allowance of sympathy than I have a just claim to. When I color and when I shake before Miss Oliver, I do not pity myself. I scorn the weakness. I know it is ignoble, a mere fever of the flesh, not, I declare, the convulsion of the soul. That is just as fixed as a rock, firm set in the depths of a restless sea. Know me to be what I am, a cold, hard man.
I smiled incredulously.
You have taken my confidence by storm, and now it is much at your service. I am simply in my original state, stripped of that blood-bleached robe with which Christianity covers human deformity. A cold, hard, ambitious man. Natural affection only of all the sentiments has permanent power over me. Reason and not feeling is my guide. My ambition is unlimited. My desire to rise higher, to do more than others, insatiable. I honor endurance, perseverance, industry, talent, because these are the means by which men achieve great ends and mount to lofty eminence. I watch your career with interest because I consider you a specimen of a diligent, orderly, energetic woman. not because I deeply compassionate what you have gone through or what you still suffer.
You would describe yourself as a mere pagan philosopher.
No, there is this difference between me and deistic philosophers, I believe, and I believe the gospel. You missed your epitaph. I am not a pagan, but a Christian philosopher, a follower of the sect of Jesus. As his disciple, I adopt his pure, his merciful, his benignant doctrines. I advocate them. I am sworn to spread them. One in youth to religion, she has cultivated my original qualities thus. From the minute germ, natural affection, she has developed the overshadowing tree, philanthropy. From the wild, stingy root of human uprightness, she has reared a due sense of the divine justice, of the ambition to win power and renown for my wretched self. She has formed the ambition to spread my master's kingdom, to achieve victories for the standards of the cross. So much has religion done for me, turning the original materials to the best account, pruning and training nature. But she could not eradicate nature, nor will it be eradicated till this mortal shall put on immortality.
Having said this, he took his hat, which lay on the table beside my pallet. Once more, he looked at the portrait.
She is lovely. She is well named the Rose of the World, indeed.
And may I not paint one like it for you?
Cui bono? No.
He drew over the picture the sheet of thin paper on which I was accustomed to rest my hand in painting to prevent the cardboard from being sullied. What he suddenly saw on this blank paper, it was impossible for me to tell, but something had caught his eye. He took it up with a snatch. He looked at the edge, then shot a glance at me, inexpressibly peculiar and quite incomprehensible. A glance that seemed to take and make note of every point in my shape, face, and dress, for it traversed all, quick, keen as lightning. His lip parted, as if to speak, but he checked the coming sentence, whatever it was.
What is the matter?
Nothing in the world.
And replacing the paper, I saw him dexterously tear a narrow slip from the margin. It disappeared in his glove, and with one hasty nod and good afternoon,
Well,
I exclaimed, using an expression of the district.
That caps the globe, however.
I, in my turn, scrutinised the paper, but saw nothing on it, save a few dingy stains of paint where I'd tried the tint in my pencil. I pondered the mystery a minute or two, but finding it insolvable and being certain it could not be of much moment, I dismissed and soon forgot it. Chapter 33. When Mr. St. John went, it was beginning to snow. The whirling storm continued all night. The next day, a keen wind brought fresh and blinding falls. By twilight, the valley was drifted up and almost impassable. I had closed my shutter, laid a mat to the door to prevent the snow from blowing in under it, trimmed my fire, and after sitting nearly an hour on the hearth, listening to the muffled fury of the tempest, I lit a candle, took down Marmion, and beginning,
Day set on, Norham's castle steep, and Tweed's fair river broad and deep, and Cheviot's mountains lone, the massive towers the donjon keep, the flanking walls that round them sweep, and yellow lustre shone.
soon forgot storm in music. I heard a noise. The wind, I thought, shook the door. No, it was St. John Rivers, who, lifting the latch, came in out of the frozen hurricane, the howling darkness, and stood before me, the cloak that covered his tall figure all white as a glacier. I was almost in consternation, so little had I expected any guest from the blocked-up vale that night.
Any ill news? Has anything happened?
No, how very easily alarmed you are.
He answered, removing his cloak and hanging it up against the door, towards which he again coolly pushed the mat which his entrance had deranged. He stamped the snow from his boots.
I shall sully the purity of your floor, but you must excuse me for once.
Then he approached the fire.
I have had hard work to get here, I assure you.
He observed as he warmed his hands over the flame.
One drift took me up to the waist. Happily, the snow is quite soft yet.
But why are you come?
I could not forbear saying.
Rather an inhospitable question to put to a visitor, but since you ask it, I answer simply to have a little talk with you. I got tired of my mute books and empty rooms. Besides, since yesterday, I have experienced the excitement of a person to whom a tale has been half told and who is impatient to hear the sequel.
He sat down. I recalled his singular conduct of yesterday, and really I began to fear his wits were touched. If he were insane, however, his was a very cool and collected insanity. I had never seen that handsome-featured face of his look more like chiselled marble than it did just now, as he put aside his snow-wet hair from his forehead and let the firelight shine free on his pale brow and cheek as pale, where it grieved me to discover the hollow trace of care or sorrow now so plainly graved. I waited, expecting he would say something I could at least comprehend, but his hand was now at his chin, his finger on his lip. He was thinking. It struck me that his hand looked wasted like his face. A perhaps uncalled for gush of pity came over my heart. I was moved to say,
I wish Diana or Mary would come and live with you. It is too bad that you should be quite alone, and you are recklessly rash about your own health.
Not at all. I care for myself when necessary. I am well now. What do you see amiss in me?
This was said with a careless, abstracted indifference, which showed that my solicitude was, at least in his opinion, wholly superfluous. I was silenced. He still slowly moved his finger over his upper lip, and still his eye dwelt dreamily on the glowing grate. Thinking it urgent to say something, I asked him presently if he felt any cold draught from the door which was behind him.
No.
He responded shortly and somewhat testily.
Well, if you won't talk, you may be still. I'll let you alone now and return to my book.
So I snuffed the candle and resumed the perusal of Marmion. He soon stirred. My eye was instantly drawn to his movements. He only took out a morocco pocketbook, thence produced a letter, which he read in silence, folded, put it back, relapsed into meditation. It was vain to try to read with such an inscrutable fixture before me, nor could I in impatience consent to be dumb. He might rebuff me if he liked, but talk I would.
Have you heard from Diana or Mary lately?
Not since the letter I showed you a week ago.
There has not been any change made about your own arrangements? You will not be summoned to leave England sooner than you expected?
I fear not. Indeed, such chance is too good to befall me.
Baffled so far, I changed my ground. I bethought myself to talk about the school and my scholars.
Mary Garrett's mother is better, and Mary came back to the school this morning, and I shall have 4 new girls next week from the Foundry Close. They would have to come today, but for the snow.
Indeed.
Mr. Oliver pays for 2.
Does he?
He means to give the whole school a treat at Christmas.
I know.
Was it your suggestion?
No.
Whose then?
His daughters, I think.
It is like her. She is so good-natured.
Yes.
Again came the blank of a pause. The clock struck 8 strokes. It aroused him. He uncrossed his legs, sat erect, and turned to me.
Leave your book a moment and come nearer to the fire.
Wondering, and of my wonder finding no end, I complied.
Half an hour ago, I spoke of my impatience to hear the sequel of a tale On reflection, I find the matter will be better managed by my assuming the narrator's part and converting you into the listener. Before commencing, it is but fair to warn you that the story will sound somewhat hackneyed to your ears, but stale details often regain a degree of freshness when they pass through new lips. For the rest, whatever trite or novel, it is short. 20 years ago, a poor curate, never mind his name at this moment, fell in love with a rich man's daughter. She fell in love with him and married him against the advice of all her friends, who consequently disowned her immediately after the wedding. Before 2 years passed, the rash pair were both dead and lay quietly side by side under one slab. I have seen their grave. It formed part of the pavement of a huge churchyard surrounding the grim, soot-black old cathedral of an overgrowing manufacturing town in Lincolnshire. They left a daughter, which at its very birth, Charity received in her lap. Cold as that of the snowdrift I almost stuck fast in tonight, Charity carried the friendless thing to the house of its rich maternal relations. It was reared by an aunt-in-law called, I come to names now, Mrs. Reed of Gateshead. You start. Did you hear a noise? I dare say it is only a rat scrambling along the rafters of the adjoining schoolroom. It was a barn before I had repaired it and altered, and barns are generally haunted by rats. To proceed, Mrs. Reed kept the orphan 10 years. Whether it was happy or not with her, I cannot say, never having been told. But at the end of that time, she transferred it to a place, you know, being no other than Lowood School, where you so long resided yourself. It seems her career there was very honorable. From a pupil, she became a teacher, like yourself. Really, it strikes me there are parallel points in your fate, in her history and yours. She left it to be a governess. There again, your fates were analogous. She undertook the education of the ward of a certain Mr. Rochester.
Mr. Rivers.
I can guess your feelings, but restrain them for a while. I have nearly finished. Hear me to the end. Of Mr. Rochester's character, I know nothing, but the one fact that he professed to offer honorable marriage to this young girl, and that at the very altar she discovered he had a wife, yet alive, though a lunatic. What his subsequent conduct and proposals were is a matter of pure conjecture. But when an event transpired which rendered inquiry after the governess necessary, it was discovered she was gone. No one could tell when, where, or how. She had left Thornfield Hall in the night. Every research after her course had been in vain. The country had been scoured far and wide. No vestige of information could be gathered respecting her. Yet that she should be found is become a matter of serious urgency. Advertisements have been put in all the papers. I myself have received a letter from one Mr. Briggs, a solicitor, communicating the details I have just imparted. Is it not an odd tale?
Just tell me this, and since you know so much, you surely can tell it me. What of Mr. Rochester? How and where is he? What is he doing? Is he well?
I am ignorant of all concerning Mr. Rochester. The letter never mentions him, but to narrate the fraudulent and illegal attempt I have adverted to. You should rather ask me the name of the governess, the nature of the event which requires her appearance.
Did no one go to Thornfield Hall then? No one see Mr. Rochester?
I suppose not.
No, but they wrote to him?
Of course.
And what did he say? Who has the letters?
Mr. Briggs intimates that the answer to his application was not from Mr. Rochester, but from a lady. It is signed Alice Fairfax.
I felt cold and dismayed. My worst fears then were probably true. He had, in all probability, left England and rushed in reckless desperation to some former haunt on the continent. And what opiate for his severe sufferings, what object for his strong passions had he sought there? I dared not answer the question. Oh, my poor master, once almost my husband, whom I had often called my dear Edward,
He must have been a bad man,
observed Mr. Rivers.
You don't know him. Don't pronounce an opinion upon him,
I said with warmth.
Very well. And indeed, my head is otherwise occupied, and with him, I have to finish my tale. Since you won't ask the governess's name, I must tell it of my own accord. Stay, I have it here. It is always more satisfactory to see important points written down, fairly committed to black and white.
And the pocketbook was again deliberately produced, opened, sought through. From one of its compartments was extracted a shabby slip of paper hastily torn off. I recognised in its texture and its stains of ultramarine and lake and vermilion the ravaged margin of the portrait cover. He got up, held it close to my eyes, and I read, traced in Indian ink, in my own handwriting, the words Jane Eyre, the work doubtless of some moment of abstraction.
Briggs wrote to me of a Jane Eyre. The advertisements demanded a Jane Eyre. I knew a Jane Elliot. I confess I had my suspicions, but it was only yesterday afternoon that they were at once resolved into certainty. You own the name and renounce the alias.
Briggs is in London. Oh, yes, but where's Mr. Briggs? He perhaps knows more of Mr. Rochester than you do.
Well, Briggs is in London. I should doubt his knowing anything at all about Mr. Rochester. It is not in Mr. Rochester he is interested. Meantime, you forget essential points in pursuing trifles. You do not inquire why Mr. Briggs sought after you, what he wanted with you.
Well, what did he want?
Merely to tell you that your uncle, Mr. Eyre of Madeira, is dead. That he has left you all his property, and that you are now rich. Merely that, nothing more.
I. Rich?
Yes, rich. You, quite an heiress.
Silence succeeded.
You must prove your identity, of course.
Resumed St. John presently.
A step which will offer no difficulties. You can then enter on immediate possession. Your fortune is vested in the English funds. Briggs has the will and the necessary documents.
Here was a new card turned up. It's a fine thing, reader, to be in a moment, lifted in a moment from indigence to wealth. A very fine thing. But not a matter one can comprehend or consequently enjoy all at once. And then there are other chances in life, far more thrilling and rapture-giving. This is solid, an affair of the actual world, nothing ideal about it. All its associations are solid and sober, and its manifestations are the same. One does not jump and spring and shout, hurrah, at hearing one's got a fortune. One begins to consider responsibilities and to ponder business. On a base of steady satisfaction rise certain grave cares, and we contain ourselves and brood over our bliss with a solemn brow. Besides, the words legacy, bequest, go side by side with the words death, funeral. My uncle, I had heard, was dead, my only relative. Ever since being made aware of his existence, I had cherished the hope of one day seeing him. Now I never should. And then this money came only to me, not to me and a rejoicing family, but to my isolated self. It was a grand boon, doubtless, and independence would be glorious. Yes, I felt that. That thought swelled my heart.
You unbend your forehead at last. I thought Medusa had looked at you and that you were turned to stone. Perhaps now you will ask how much you're worth.
How much am I worth?
Oh, a trifle. Nothing, of course, to speak of. 20,000 pounds, I think they say. But what is that?
20,000 pounds.
Here was a new stunner. I had been calculating on 4,000 or 5,000. This news actually took my breath for a moment. Mr. St. John, whom I had never heard laugh before, laughed now.
Well, if you had committed a murder and I had told you your crime was discovered, you could scarcely look more aghast.
It is a large sum. Don't you think there's a mistake?
No mistake at all.
Perhaps you have read the figures wrong. It may be 2,000.
It is written in letters, not figures, 20,000.
I again felt rather like an individual of but average gastronomical powers, sitting down to feast alone at a table spread with provisions for 100. Mr. Rivers rose now and put his cloak on.
If it were not such a very wild night, I would send Hannah down to keep you company. You look too desperately miserable to be left alone. But Hannah, poor woman, could not stride the drifts so well as I. Her legs are not quite so long, so I must e'en leave you to your sorrows. Good night.
He was lifting the latch. A sudden thought occurred to me.
Stop 1 minute.
Well?
It puzzles me to know why Mr. Briggs wrote to you about me, or how he knew you, or could fancy that you, living in such an out-of-the-way place, had the power to aid in my discovery.
Oh, I'm a clergyman, and clergy are often appealed to about odd matters.
Again, the latch rattled.
No, that does not satisfy me,
I exclaimed, and indeed there was something in the hasty and unexplanatory reply which, instead of allaying, piqued my curiosity more than ever.
It is a very strange piece of business. I must know more about it.
Another time.
No, tonight. Tonight!
And as he turned from the door, I placed myself between it and him. He looked rather embarrassed.
You certainly shall not go till you have told me all.
I would rather not just now.
You shall. You must.
I would rather Diana or Mary informed you.
Of course, these objections wrought my eagerness to a climax. Gratified it must be, and that without delay, and I told him so.
But I apprised you that I was a hard man, difficult to persuade.
And I am a hard woman, impossible to put off.
And then I am cold, no fervor infects me.
Whereas I am hot, and fire dissolves ice. The blaze there has thawed all the snow from your cloak. By the same token, it has streamed onto my floor and made it like a trampled street. As you hope ever to be forgiven, Mr. Rivers, the high crime and misdemeanor of spoiling a sanded kitchen, tell me what I wish to know.
Well then, I yield, if not to your earnestness, to your perseverance, as stone is worn by continual dropping. Besides, you must know someday, as well now as later, your name is Jane Eyre.
Of course, that was all settled before.
You are not, perhaps, aware that I am your namesake, that I was christened St. John Eyre Rivers.
No, indeed.
I remember now seeing the letter E comprised in your initials written in books you have at different times lent me, but I never asked for what that name stood. But what then? Surely I stopped. I could not trust myself to entertain, much less express the thought that rushed upon me, that embodied itself, that in a second stood out in a strong, solid probability. Circumstances knit themselves, fitted themselves, shot into order. The chain that had been lying hitherto a formless lump of links was drawn out straight. Every ring was perfect, the connection complete. I knew by instinct how the matter stood before St. John had said another word. But I cannot expect the reader to have the same intuitive perception, so I must repeat his explanation.
My mother's name was Eyre. She had two brothers, one a clergyman who married Miss Jane Reed of Gateshead, the other, John Eyre, Esquire, merchant late of Funchal, Madeira. Mr. Briggs, being Mr. Eyre's solicitor, wrote to us last August to inform us of our uncle's death and to say that he had left his property to his brother, the clergyman orphan's daughter, overlooking us in consequence of a quarrel never forgiven between him and my father. He wrote again a few weeks since to intimate that the heiress was lost and asking if we knew anything of her. A name casually written on a slip of paper has enabled me to find her out. You know the rest.
Again he was going, but I set my back against the door.
Do let me speak. Let me have one moment to draw breath and reflect.
I paused. He stood before me, hat in hand, looking composed enough. I resumed.
Your mother was my father's sister.
Yes.
My aunt, consequently.
He bowed.
My Uncle John was your Uncle John. You, Diane, and Mary are his sister's children, as I am his brother's child?
Undeniably.
You three, then, are my cousins. Half our blood on each side flows from the same source.
We are cousins, yes.
I surveyed him. It seemed I had found a brother, one I could be proud of, one I could love, and two sisters whose qualities were such that when I knew them but as mere strangers, they had inspired me with genuine affection and admiration. The two girls on whom, kneeling down on the wet ground and looking through the low latticed window of Morehouse kitchen, I had gazed with so bitter a mixture of interest and despair, were my near kinswomen, and the young and stately gentleman who had found me almost dying at his threshold was my blood relation. Glorious discovery to a lonely wretch. This was wealth indeed, wealth to the heart, a mine of pure genial affections. This was a blessing, bright, vivid, and exhilarating, not like the ponderous gift of gold, rich and welcoming enough in its way, but sobering from its weight. I now clapped my hands in sudden joy. My pulse bounded, my veins thrilled.
Oh, I am glad. I am glad.
St. John smiled.
Did I not say you neglected essential points to pursue trifles? You were serious when I told you you had got a fortune, and now, for a matter of no moment, you're excited.
What can you mean? It may be of no moment to you. You have sisters and don't care for a cousin, but I had nobody. And now, three relations, or two, if you don't choose to be counted, are born into my world full grown. I say again, I am glad.
I walked fast through the room. I stopped, half suffocated with the thoughts that rose faster than I could receive, comprehend, settle them. Thoughts of what might, could, would, and should be, and that ere long. I looked at the blank wall. It seemed a sky thick with ascending stars. Every one lit me to a purpose or delight. Those who had saved my life, whom till this hour I had loved barrenly, I could now benefit. They were under a yoke. I could free them. They were scattered. I could reunite them. The independence, the affluence which was mine might be theirs too. Were we not four? £20,000 shared equally would be £5,000 each. Justice and enough to spare. Justice would be done. Mutual happiness secured. Now the wealth did not weigh on me. Now it was not a mere bequest of coin. It was a legacy of life, hope, enjoyment. How I looked while these ideas were taking my spirit by storm, I cannot tell. But I perceived soon that Mr. Rivers had placed a chair behind me and was gently attempting to make me sit down on it. He also advised me to be composed. I scorned the insinuation of helplessness and distraction, shook off his hand and began to walk about again.
Write Diana and Mary tomorrow, and tell them to come home directly. Diana said they would both consider themselves rich with £1,000, so with 5,000 they will do very well.
Tell me where I can get you a glass of water. You must really make an effort to tranquilize your feelings.
Nonsense! And what sort of an effect will the bequest have on you? Will it keep you in England, induce you to marry Miss Oliver and settle down like an ordinary mortal?
You wander, your head becomes confused. You have been too abrupt in communicating the news. It has excited you beyond your strength.
Mr. Rivers, you quite put me out of patience. I am rational enough. It is you who misunderstand, or rather who affect to misunderstand.
Perhaps if you explained yourself a little more fully, I should comprehend better.
Explain. What is there to explain? You cannot fail to see that £20,000, the sum in question divided equally between the nephew and 3 nieces of our uncle, will give 5,000 to each. What I want is that you should write to your sisters and tell them of the fortune that is accrued to them.
To you, you mean?
I have intimated my view of the case. I am incapable of taking any other. I am not brutally selfish, blindly unjust, or fiendishly ungrateful. Besides, I am resolved I will have a home and connections. I like Moor House, and I will live at Moor House. I like Diana and Mary, and I will attach myself for life to Diana and Mary. It would please and benefit me to have £5,000. It would torment and oppress me to have 20,000, which, moreover, can never be mine in justice, though it might be in law. I abandon you, then, what is absolutely superfluous to me. Let there be no opposition and no discussion about it. Let us agree amongst each other and decide the point at once.
This is acting on first impulses. You must take days to consider such a matter, ere your word can be regarded as valid.
Oh, if all you doubt is my sincerity, I am easy. You see the justice of the case?
I do see a certain justice, but it is contrary to all custom. Besides, the entire fortune is your right. My uncle gained it by his own efforts. He was free to leave it to whom he would. He left it to you. After all, justice permits you to keep it. You may, with a clear conscience, consider it absolutely your own.
With me, it is fully as much a matter of feeling as of conscience. I must indulge my feelings. I so seldom have had an opportunity of doing so. Were you to argue, object, and annoy me for a year, I could not forego the delicious pleasure of which I have caught a glimpse, but of repaying in part a mighty obligation and winning to myself lifelong friends.
You think so now because you do not know what it is to possess, nor consequently to enjoy wealth. You cannot form a notion of the importance £20,000 would give you, of the place it would enable you to take in society, of the prospects it would open to you. You cannot.
And you cannot at all imagine the craving I have for fraternal and sisterly love. I never had a home. I never had brothers or sisters. I must and will have them now. You are not reluctant to admit me and own me, are you?
Jane, I will be your brother. My sisters will be your sisters, without stipulating for the sacrifice of your rights.
Brother, yes. And at the distance of 1,000 leagues, sisters, yes, slaving among strangers. I, wealthy, gorged with gold I never earned and do not merit. You, penniless. Famous equality and fraternization, close union, intimate attachment.
But Jane, your aspirations after family ties and domestic happiness may be realized otherwise than by the means you contemplate. You may marry.
Nonsense again. Marry. I don't want to marry. I never shall marry.
That is saying too much. Such hazardous affirmations are a proof of the excitement under which you labor.
It's not saying too much. I know what I feel, and how averse are my inclinations to the bare thought of marriage. No one would take me for love. I will not be regarded in the light of mere money as speculation, and I do not want a stranger, unsympathizing, alien, different from me. I want my kindred, those with whom I have full fellow feeling. Say again, you will be my brother. When you uttered those words, I was satisfied, happy. Repeat them. If you cannot repeat them sincerely.
I think I can. I know I've always loved my own sisters, and I know on what my affection for them is grounded. Respect for their worth and admiration of their talents. You too have principle in mind. Your tastes and habits resemble Diana's and Mary's. Your presence is always agreeable to me. In your conversation, I have already for some time found a salutary solace. I feel I can easily and naturally make room in my heart for you. as my third and youngest sister.
Thank you. That contents me for tonight. Now you had better go. For if you stay longer, you will perhaps irritate me afresh by some mistrustful scruple.
And the school, Miss Eyre? It must be shut up now, I suppose.
No. I will retain my post of mistress till you get a substitute.
He smiled approbation. We shook hands and he took leave. I need not narrate in detail the further struggles I had and arguments I used to get matters regarding the legacy settled as I wished. My task was a very hard one, but as I was absolutely resolved, as my cousins saw at length that my mind was really and immutably fixed on making a just division of the property, as they must in their own hearts have felt the equity of the intention, and must besides have been innately conscious that in my place they would have done precisely what I wished to do. They yielded at length, so far as to consent to put the affair to arbitration. The judges chosen were Mr. Oliver and an able lawyer. Both coincided in my opinion. I carried my point. The instruments of transfer were drawn out. St. John, Diana, Mary and I each became possessed of a competency. Chapter 34. It was near Christmas by the time all was settled. The season of general holiday approached. I now closed Morton School, taking care that the parting should not be barren on my side. Good fortune opens the hand as well as the heart wonderfully, and to give somewhat when we have largely received is but to afford a vent to the unusual ebullition of the sensations. I had long felt with pleasure that many of my rustic scholars liked me, and when we parted, that consciousness was confirmed. They manifested their affection plainly and strongly. Deep was my gratification to find I had really a place in their unsophisticated hearts. I promised them that never a week would pass in future that I did not visit them and give them an hour's teaching in their school. Mr. Rivers came up, as having seen the classes, now numbering 60 girls, file out before me and lock the door, I stood with the key in my hand, exchanging a few words of special farewell with some half dozen of my best scholars, as decent, respectable, modest and well-informed young women as could be found in the ranks of the British peasantry. And that is saying a great deal, for after all, the British peasantry are the best taught, best mannered, most self-respecting of any in Europe. Since those days, I have seen paysan and bäuerinnen, and the best of them seem to me ignorant, coarse and besotted compared with my Morton girls.
Do you consider you have got your reward for a season of exertion?
Asked Mr. Rivers when they were gone.
Does not the consciousness of having done some real good in your day and generation give pleasure?
Doubtless.
And you have only toiled a few months. Would not a life devoted to the task of regenerating your race be well spent?
Yes, but I could not go on forever so. I want to enjoy my own faculties as well as to cultivate those of other people. I must enjoy them now. Don't recall either my mind or body to the school. I am out of it and disposed for full holiday.
He looked grave.
What now? What sudden eagerness is this you evince? What are you going to do?
To be active. As active as I can. And first, I must beg you to set Hannah at liberty and get somebody else to wait on you.
Do you want her?
Yes, to go with me to Moor House. Diana and Mary will be at home in a week, and I want to have everything in order against their arrival.
I understand. I thought you were for flying off on some excursion. It is better so. Hannah shall go with you.
Tell her to be ready by tomorrow then. And here's the schoolroom key. I will give you the key of my cottage in the morning.
Took it.
You give it up very gleefully. I don't quite understand your lightheartedness because I cannot tell what employment you propose to yourself as a substitute for the one you are relinquishing. What aim, what purpose, what ambition in life have you now?
My first aim will be to clean down. Do you comprehend the full force of the expression? To clean down Moor House from chamber to cellar. My next is to rub it up with beeswax, oil, and an indefinite number of cloths till it glitters again. My third, to arrange every chair, table, bed, carpet with mathematical precision. Afterwards, I shall go near to ruin you in coals and peat to keep you up, good fires in every room. And lastly, the 2 days preceding, that on which your sisters are expected, will be devoted by Hannah and me to such a beating of eggs, sorting of currants, grating of spices, compounding of Christmas cakes, chopping up of materials for mince pies, and solemnizing of other culinary rites, as words can convey, but an inadequate notion of to the uninitiated like you. My purpose, in short, is to have all things in an absolute perfect state of readiness for Diana and Mary before next Thursday, and my ambition is to give them a beau ideal welcome when they come.
St. John smiled slightly. Still, he was dissatisfied.
It is all very well for the present, but seriously, I trust that when the first flush of vivacity is over, you will look a little higher than domestic endearments and household joys.
The best things the world has.
No, Jane, no. This world is the scene of fruition. Do not attempt to make it so, nor of rest. Do not turn slothful.
I mean, on the contrary, to be busy.
Jane, I excuse you for the present. 2 months' grace I allow you for the full enjoyment of your new position and for pleasing yourself with this late-found charm of relationship. But then, I hope you will begin to look beyond Moor House and Morton and sisterly society and the selfish calm and sensual comfort of civilized affluence. I hope your energies will then once more trouble you with their strength.
I looked at him with surprise.
St. John, I think you are almost wicked to talk so. I am disposed to be as content as a queen, and you try to stir me up to restlessness. To what end?
To the end of turning to profit the talents which God has committed to your keeping, and of which he will surely one day demand a strict account. Jane, I shall watch you closely and anxiously. I warn you of that. And try to restrain the disproportionate fervor with which you throw yourself into commonplace home pleasures. Don't cling so tenaciously to ties of the flesh. Save your constancy and ardor for an adequate cause. Forbear to waste them on trite, transient objects. Do you hear, Jane?
Yes, just as if you were speaking Greek. I feel I have adequate cause to be happy, and I will be happy. Goodbye.
Happy at Moor House I was, and hard I worked, and so did Hannah. She was charmed to see how jovial I could be amidst the bustle of a house turned topsy-turvy, how I could brush and dust and clean and cook. And really, after a day or two of confusion worse confounded, it was delightful by degrees to invoke order from the chaos ourselves had made. I had previously taken a journey to Skipton to purchase some new furniture, my cousins having given me carte blanche to effect what alterations I pleased, and a sum having been set aside for that purpose. The ordinary sitting room and bedrooms I left much as they were, for I knew Diana and Mary would derive much pleasure from seeing them again, seeing again the old homely tables and chairs and beds, than from the spectacle of the smartest innovations. Still, some novelty was necessary to give to their return the piquancy with which I wished it to be invested. Dark, handsome new carpets and curtains, an arrangement of some carefully selected antique ornaments in porcelain and bronze, new coverings and mirrors and dressing cases for the toilet tables answered the end. They looked fresh without being glaring. A spare parlour and bedroom I refurnished entirely with old mahogany and crimson upholstery. I laid canvas on the passage and carpets on the stairs. When all was finished, I thought Moor House as complete a model of bright snugness within, as it was at this season a specimen of wintry waste and desert dreariness without. The eventful Thursday at length came. They were expected about dark, and ere dusk, fires were lit upstairs and below. The kitchen was in perfect trim. Hannah and I were dressed, and all was in readiness. St. John arrived first. I had entreated him to keep quite clear of the house till everything was arranged, and indeed the bare idea of the commotion, at once sordid and trivial, going on within its walls, sufficed to scare him into estrangement. He found me in the kitchen, watching the progress of certain cakes for tea, then baking. Approaching the hearth, he asked if I were at last satisfied with housemaid's work. I answered by inviting him to accompany me on a general inspection of the results of my labour. With some difficulty, I got him to make a tour of the house. He just looked in at the doors I opened, and when he had wandered upstairs and downstairs, he said I must have gone through a great deal of fatigue and trouble to have effected such considerable changes in so short a time. But not a syllable did he utter, indicating pleasure in the improved aspect of his abode. This silence damped me. I thought perhaps the alterations had disturbed some old associations he valued. I inquired whether this was the case, no doubt in a somewhat crestfallen tone.
Not at all. He had, on the contrary, remarked that I had scrupulously respected every association. He feared, indeed, I must have bestowed more thought on the matter than it was worth. How many minutes, for instance, had I devoted to studying the arrangement of this very room? By the by, could I tell him where such a book was?
I showed him the volume on the shelf. He took it down and, withdrawing to his accustomed window recess, he began to read it. Now, I did not like this reader. St. John was a good man, but I began to feel he had spoken truth of himself when he said he was hard and cold. The humanities and amenities of life had no attraction for him. Its peaceful enjoyments no charm. Literally, he lived only to aspire after what was good and great, certainly, but still he would never rest nor approve of others resting round him. As I looked at his lofty forehead, still and pale as a white stone, at his fine lineaments fixed in study, I comprehended all at once that he would hardly make a good husband, that it would be a trying thing to be his wife. I understood, as by inspiration, the nature of his love for Miss Oliver. I agreed with him that it was but a love of the senses. I comprehended how he should despise himself for the feverish influence it exercised over him, how he should wish to stifle and destroy it, how he should mistrust its ever conducting permanently to his happiness or hers. I saw he was of the material from which nature hews her heroes, Christian and pagan, her lawgivers, her statesmen, her conquerors, a steadfast bulwark for great interests to rest upon, but at the fireside, too often a cold, cumbrous column, gloomy and out of place.
This parlour is not his sphere. The Himalayan ridge or Kafir bush, even the plague-cursed Guinea coast swamp would suit him better. Well, may he eschew the calm of domestic life. It is not his element. There his faculties stagnant. They cannot develop or appear to advantage. It is in scenes of strife and danger, where courage is proved and energy exercised and fortitude tasked, that he will speak and move, the leader and superior. A married child would have the advantage of him on his hearth. He is right to choose a missionary's career. I see it now.
They are coming! They are coming!
Cried Hannah, throwing open the parlour door. At the same moment, old Carlo barked joyfully. Out I ran. It was now dark, but a rumbling of wheels was audible. Hannah soon had a lantern lit. The vehicle had stopped at the wicket. The driver opened the door. First one well-known form, then another stepped out. In a minute I had my face under their bonnets, in contact first with Mary's soft cheek, then with Diana's flowing curls. They laughed, kissed me, then Hannah patted Carlo, who was half wild with delight, asked eagerly if all was well, and being assured in the affirmative, hastened into the house. They were stiff with their long and jolting drive from Whitcross, and chilled with the frosty night air, but their pleasant countenances expanded to the cheerful firelight. While the driver and Hannah brought in the boxes, they demanded St. John. At this moment he advanced from the parlour. They both threw their arms round his neck at once. He gave each one a quiet kiss, said in a low tone a few words of welcome, stood a while to be talked to, and then, intimating that he supposed they would soon rejoin him in the parlour, withdrew there as to a place of refuge. I had lit their candles to go upstairs, but Diana had first to give hospitable orders respecting the driver. This done, both followed me. They were delighted with the renovation and decorations of their rooms, with the new drapery and fresh carpets and richly tinted china vases. They expressed their gratification ungrudgingly. I had the pleasure of feeling that my arrangements met their wishes exactly, and that what I had done added a vivid charm to their joyous return home. Sweet was that evening. My cousins, full of exhilaration, were so eloquent in narrative and comment that their fluency covered St. John's taciturnity. He was sincerely glad to see his sisters, but in their glow of fervour and flow of joy he could not sympathise. The event of the day, that is the return of Diana and Mary, pleased him, but the accompaniments of that event, the glad tumult, the garrulous glee of reception, irked him. I saw he wished the calmer morrow was come. In the very meridian of the night's enjoyment, about an hour after tea, a rap was heard at the door. Hannah entered with the intimation that
a poor lad was come at that unlikely time to fetch Mr. Rivers to see his mother, who was drawing away.
Where does she live, Hannah?
Clear up at Whitcross Brow, almost 4 miles off, and moor and moss all the way.
Tell him I will go.
I'm sure, sir, that you'd better not. It's the worst road to travel after dark that can be. There's no track at all over the bog, and then it is such a bitter night, the keenest wind you ever felt. You'd better send word, sir, that you'll be there in the morning.
But he was already in the passage. Putting on his cloak, and without one objection, one murmur, he departed. It was then 9 o'clock. He did not return till midnight. Starved and tired enough he was, but he looked happier than when he set out. He had performed an act of duty, made an exertion, felt his own strength to do and deny, and was on better terms with himself. I am afraid the whole of the ensuing week tried his patience. It was Christmas week. We took to no settled employment, but spent it in a sort of merry domestic dissipation. The air of the moors, the freedom of home, the dawn of prosperity, acted on Diana and Mary's spirits like some life-giving elixir. They were gay from morning till noon, and from noon till night. They could always talk, and their discourse, witty, pithy, original, had such charms for me that I preferred listening to it and sharing in it to doing anything else. St. John did not rebuke our vivacity, but he escaped from it. He was seldom in the house. His parish was large, the population scattered, and he found daily business in visiting the sick and poor in its different districts. One morning at breakfast, Diana, after looking a little pensive for some minutes, asked him,
Are your plans yet unchanged?
Unchanged and unchangeable,
was the reply, and he proceeded to inform us that his departure from England was now definitively fixed for the ensuing year.
And Rosamond Oliver?
Suggested Mary, the words seeming to escape her lips involuntarily, for no sooner had she uttered them than she made a gesture as if wishing to recall them. St. John had a book in his hand. It was his unsocial custom to read at meals. He closed it and looked up.
Rosamond Oliver is about to be married to Mr. Granby, one of the best connected and most estimable residents in Yorkshire, grandson and heir to Sir Frederick Granby. I had the intelligence from her father yesterday.
His sisters looked at each other and at me. We all three looked at him. He was serene as glass.
The match must have been got up hastily. They cannot have known each other long.
But 2 months? They met in October at the county ball at Scarborough, but where there were no obstacles to a union, as in the present case, where the connection is in every point desirable, delays are unnecessary. They will be married as soon as Scarborough Place, which Sir Frederick gives up to them, can be refitted for their reception.
The first time I found St. John alone after this communication, I felt tempted to inquire if the event distressed him. But he seemed so little to need sympathy that, so far from venturing to offer him more, I experienced some shame at the recollection of what I had already hazarded. Besides, I was out of practice in talking to him. His reserve was again frozen over, and my frankness was congealed beneath it. He had not kept his promise of treating me like his sisters. He continually made little chilling differences between us, which did not at all tend to the development of cordiality. In short, now that I was acknowledged his kinswoman and lived under the same roof with him, I felt the distance between us to be far greater than when he had only known me as the village schoolmistress. When I remembered how far I had once been admitted to his confidence, I could hardly comprehend his present frigidity. Such being the case, I felt not a little surprised when he raised his head suddenly from the desk over which he was stooping and said,
"You see, Jane, the battle is fought and victory won."
Startled at being thus addressed, I did not immediately reply. After a moment's hesitation, I answered,
But are you sure you are not in the position of those conquerors whose triumphs have not cost them too dear? Will not such another ruin you?
I think not, and if I were, it does not much signify. I shall never be called upon to contend for such another. The event of the conflict is decisive. My way now is clear. I thank God for it.
So saying, he returned to his papers and his silence. As our mutual happiness, i.e. Diana's, Mary's and mine, settled into a quieter character, and we resumed our usual habits and regular studies, St. John stayed more at home. He sat with us in the same room, sometimes for hours together. While Mary drew, Diana pursued a course of encyclopedic reading she had, to my awe and amazement, undertaken, and I fagged away at German. He pondered a mystic law of his own, that of some Eastern tongue, the acquisition of which he thought necessary to his plans. Thus engaged, he appeared sitting in his own recess, quiet and absorbed enough. But that blue eye of his had a habit of leaving the outlandish-looking grammar and wandering over and sometimes fixing upon us, his fellow students, with a curious intensity of observation. If caught, it would be instantly withdrawn, yet ever and anon it returned searchingly to our table. I wondered what it meant. I wondered too at the punctual satisfaction he never failed to exhibit on an occasion that seemed to me of small moment, namely my weekly visit to Morton School. And still more was I puzzled when, if the day was unfavourable, if there was snow or rain or high wind and his sisters urged me not to go, he would invariably make light of their solicitude and encourage me to accomplish the task without regard to the elements.
Jane is not such a weakling as you would make her. She can bear a blast or a shower or a few flakes of snow as well as any of us. Her constitution is both sound and elastic, better calculated to endure variations of climate than many more robust.
And when I returned, sometimes a good deal tired and not a little weather-beaten, I never dared complain, because I saw that to murmur would be to vex him. On all occasions, fortitude pleased him. The reverse was a special annoyance. One afternoon, however, I got leave to stay at home because I really had a cold. His sisters were gone to Morton in my stead. I sat reading Schiller, he deciphering his crabbed oriental scrolls. As I exchanged a translation for an exercise, I happened to look his way, There I found myself under the influence of the ever-watchful blue eye. How long it had been searching me through and over, I cannot tell. So keen was it, and yet so cold. I felt for the moment superstitious, as if I were sitting in the room with something uncanny.
Jane, what are you doing?
Learning German.
I want you to give up German and learn Hindustani.
You are not in earnest?
In such earnest that I must have it so. And I will tell you why.
He then went on to explain that Hindustani was the language he was himself at present studying, that, as he advanced, he was apt to forget the commencement, that it would assist him greatly to have a pupil with whom he might again and again go over the elements, and so fix them thoroughly in his mind, that his choice had hovered for some time between me and his sisters, but that he had fixed on me because he saw I could sit at a task the longest of the three. Would I do him this favour? I should not perhaps have to make the sacrifice long, as it wanted now barely 3 months to his departure. St. John was not a man to be lightly refused. You felt that every impression made on him, either for pain or pleasure, was deep-graved and permanent. I consented. When Diana and Mary returned, the former found her scholar transferred from her to her brother. She laughed, and both she and Mary agreed that St. John should never have persuaded them to such a step. He answered quietly,
I know it.
I found him a very patient, very forbearing, and yet an exacting master. He expected me to do a great deal, and when I fulfilled his expectations, he, in his way, fully testified his approbation. By degrees, he acquired a certain influence over me that took away my liberty of mind. His praise and notice were much more restraining than his indifference. I could no longer talk or laugh freely when he was by, because a tiresomely importunate instinct reminded me that vivacity, at least in me, was distasteful to him. I was so fully aware that only serious moods and occupations were acceptable, that in his presence every effort to sustain or follow any other became vain. I fell under a freezing spell. When he said,
Go.
I went.
Come.
I came.
Do this.
I did it. But I did not love my servitude. I wished many a time he had continued to neglect me. One evening, when at bedtime his sisters and I stood round him, bidding him good night, he kissed each of them, as was his custom, and as was equally his custom, he gave me his hand. Diana, who chanced to be in a frolicsome mood, she was not painfully controlled by his will, for hers in another way was as strong, exclaimed,
St. John, you used to call Jane your third sister, but you don't treat her as such. You should kiss her too.
She pushed me towards him. I thought Diana very provoking and felt uncomfortably confused. And while I was thus thinking and feeling, St. John bent his head. His Greek face was brought to a level with mine. His eyes questioned my eyes piercingly. He kissed me. There are no such things as marble kisses or ice kisses, or I should say that my ecclesiastical cousin's salute belonged to one of these classes. But there may be experiment kisses, and his was an experiment kiss. When given, he viewed me to learn the result. It was not striking. I am sure I did not blush. Perhaps I might have turned a little pale, for I felt as if this kiss were a seal affixed to my fetters. He never omitted the ceremony afterwards, and the gravity and quiescence with which I underwent it seemed to invest it for him with a certain charm. As for me, I daily wished more to please him, but to do so, I felt daily more and more that I must disown half my nature, stifle half my faculties, wrest my tastes from their original bent, force myself to the adoption of pursuits for which I had no natural vocation. He wanted to train me to an elevation I could never reach. It racked me hourly to aspire to the standard he uplifted. The thing was as impossible as to mould my irregular features to his correct and classic pattern, to give to my changeable green eyes the sea blue tint and solemn lustre of his own. Not his ascendancy alone, however, held me in thrall at present. Of late, it had been easy enough for me to look sad. A cankering evil sat at my heart and drained my happiness at its source, the evil of suspense. Perhaps you think I had forgotten Mr. Rochester, reader, amidst these changes of place and fortune. Not for a moment. His idea was still with me, because it was not a vapour sunshine could disperse, nor a sand-traced effigy storms could wash away. It was a name graven on a tablet, fated to last as long as the marble it inscribed. The craving to know what had become of him followed me everywhere. When I was at Morton, I re-entered my cottage every evening to think of that. And now at Moor House, I sought my bedroom each night to brood over it. In the course of my necessary correspondence with Mr. Briggs about the will, I had inquired if he knew anything of Mr. Rochester's present residence and state of health, but, as St. John had conjectured, he was quite ignorant of all concerning him. I then wrote to Mrs. Fairfax, entreating information on the subject. I had calculated with certainty on this step answering my end. I felt sure it would elicit an early answer. I was astonished when a fortnight passed without reply, but when 2 months wore away and day after day the post arrived and brought nothing for me, I fell a prey to the keenest anxiety. I wrote again. There was a chance of my first letter having missed. Renewed hope followed renewed effort. It shone like the former for some weeks, then, like it, faded, flickered. Not a line, not a word reached me. When half a year wasted in vain expectancy, my hope died out, and then I felt dark indeed. A fine spring shone round me, which I could not enjoy. Summer approached. Diana tried to cheer me. She said I looked ill and wished to accompany me to the seaside. This St. John opposed. He said I did not want dissipation, I wanted employment. My present life was too purposeless. I required an aim, and I suppose, by way of supplying deficiencies, he prolonged still further my lessons in Hindustani and grew more urgent in requiring their accomplishment. And I, like a fool, never thought of resisting him. I could not resist him. One day, I had come to my studies in lower spirits than usual. The ebb was occasioned by a poignantly felt disappointment. Hannah had told me in the morning there was a letter for me, and when I went down to take it, almost certain that the longed-for tidings were vouchsafed me at last, I found only an unimportant note from Mr. Briggs on business. The bitter cheque had wrung from me some tears, and now, as I sat poring over the crabbed characters and flourishing tropes of an Indian scribe, my eyes filled again. St. John called me to his side to read. In attempting to do this, my voice failed me. Words were lost in sobs. He and I were the only occupants of the parlour. Diana was practising her music in the drawing room. Mary was gardening. It was a very fine May day, clear, sunny and breezy. My companion expressed no surprise at this emotion, nor did he question me as to its cause. He only said,
"We will wait a few minutes, Jane, till you are composed."
And while I smothered the paroxysm with all haste, he sat calm and patient, leaning on his desk and looking like a physician watching with the eye of science an expected and fully understood crisis in a patient's malady. Having stifled my sobs, wiped my eyes, and muttered something about not being very well that morning, I resumed my task and succeeded in completing it. St. John put away my books and his, locked his desk and said,
"And now, Jane, you shall take a walk, and with me."
I will call Diana and Mary.
"No, I want only one companion this morning, and that must be you. Put on your things, go out by the kitchen door. Take the road towards the head of Marsh Glen. I will join you in a moment."
I know no medium. I never in my life have known any medium in my dealings with hard, positive characters, antagonistic to my own, between absolute submission and determined revolt. I have always faithfully observed the one up to the moment of bursting, sometimes with volcanic vehemence, into the other. And as neither present circumstances warranted, nor my present mood inclined me to mutiny, I observed careful obedience to St. John's directions. And in 10 minutes, I was treading the wild track of the glen side by side with him. The breeze was from the west. It came over the hills sweet with scents of heath and rush. The sky was of stainless blue. The stream descending the ravine swilled with past spring rains, poured along plentiful and clear, catching golden gleams from the sun and sapphire tints from the firmament. As we advanced and left the track, we trod a soft turf, mossy fine and emerald green, minutely enamelled with a tiny white flower and spangled with a star-like yellow blossom. The hills, meantime, shut us quite in, for the glen towards its head wound to their very core.
Let us rest here,
said St. John, as we reached the first stragglers of a battalion of rocks, guarding a sort of pass, beyond which the beck rushed down a waterfall, and where, still a little farther, the mountain shook off turf and flower, had only heath for raiment and crag for gem, where it exaggerated the wild to the savage and exchanged the fresh for the frowning, where it guarded the forlorn hope of solitude and a last refuge for silence. I took a seat. St. John stood near me. He looked up the pass and down the hollow. His glance wandered away with the stream and returned to traverse the unclouded heaven which coloured it. He removed his hat, let the breeze stir his hair and kiss his brow. He seemed in communion with the genius of the haunt. With his eye, he bade farewell to something.
And I shall see it again in dreams when I sleep by the Ganges, and again in a more remote hour when another slumber overcomes me on the shore of a darker stream.
Strange words of a strange love, an austere patriot's passion for his fatherland. He sat down. For half an hour we never spoke, neither he to me, nor I to him. That interval passed, he recommenced.
Jane, I go in 6 weeks. I have taken my berth in an East Indiaman which sails on the 20th of June.
God will protect you, for you have undertaken his work.
Yes, there is my glory and joy. I am the servant of an infallible master. I am not going out under human guidance, subject to the defective laws and erring control of my feeble fellow worms. My king, my lawgiver, my captain is the all-perfect. It seems strange to me that all around me do not burn to enlist under the same banner, to join in the same enterprise.
All have not your powers, and it would be folly for the feeble to wish to march with the strong.
I do not speak to the feeble or think of them. I address only such as are worthy of the work and competent to accomplish it.
Those are few in number and difficult to discover.
You speak truly. But when found, it is right to stir them up, to urge and exhort them to the effort, to show them what their gifts are and why they were given, to speak heaven's message in their ear, to offer them, direct from God, a place in the ranks of his chosen.
If they are really qualified for the task, will not their own hearts be the first to inform them of it?
I felt as if an awful charm was framing round and gathering over me. I trembled to hear some fatal words spoken, which would at once declare and rivet the spell.
And what does your heart say?
My heart is mute. My heart is mute.
I answered, struck and thrilled.
Then I will speak for it. Jane, come with me to India. Come as my helpmeet and fellow laborer.
The glen and sky spun round, the hills heaved. It was as if I had heard a summons from heaven, as if a visionary messenger, like him of Macedonia, had announced, Come over and help us. But I was no apostle. I could not behold the herald. I could not receive his call.
Oh, St. John, have some mercy.
I appealed to one who, in the discharge of what he believed his duty, knew neither mercy nor remorse. He continued,
God and nature intended you for a missionary's wife. It is not personal, but mental endowments they have given you. You are formed for labor, not for love. A missionary's wife, you shall be. You shall be mine. I claim you, not for my pleasure, but for my sovereign service.
I am not fit for it. I have no vocation.
He had calculated on these first objections. He was not irritated by them. Indeed, as he leaned back against the crag behind him, folded his arms on his chest and fixed his countenance, I saw he was prepared for a long and trying opposition, and had taken in a stock of patience to last him to its close. Resolved, however, that close should be conquest for him.
Humility, Jane, is the groundwork of Christian virtues. You say right that you are not fit for the work. Who is fit for it? Or who that ever was truly called believed himself worthy of the summons? I, for instance, am but dust and ashes. With St. Paul, I acknowledge myself the chiefest of sinners, but I do not suffer this sense of my personal vileness to daunt me. I know my leader, that he is just as well as mighty. And while he has chosen a feeble instrument to perform a great task, he will, from the boundless stores of his providence, supply the inadequacy of the means to the end. Think like me, Jane. Trust like me. It is the rock of ages I ask you to lean on. Do not but doubt it will bear the weight of your human weakness.
I do not understand the missionary life. I have never studied missionary labors.
There I, humble as I am, can give you the aid you want. I can set you your task from hour to hour, stand by you always, help you from moment to moment. This I could do in the beginning. Soon, for I know your powers, you would be as strong and apt as myself and would not require my help.
But my powers, where are they for this undertaking? I do not feel them. Nothing speaks or stirs in me while you talk. I am sensible of no light kindling, no life quickening, no voice counseling or cheering. I wish I could make you see how much my mind is at this moment like a rayless dungeon, and with one shrinking fear fettered in its depths. Fear being persuaded by you to attempt what I cannot accomplish.
I have an answer for you. Hear it. I have watched you ever since we first met. I have made you my study for 10 months. I have proved you in that time by sundry tests, and what have I seen and elicited? In the village school, I found you could perform well, punctually, uprightly, labor uncongenial to your habits and inclinations. I saw you could perform it with capacity and tact. You could win while you controlled. In the calm with which you learnt you had become suddenly rich, I read a mind clear of the vice of Demas. Lucre had no undue power over you. In the resolute readiness with which you cut your wealth into 4 shares, keeping but one to yourself, and relinquishing the 3 others to the claim of abstract justice, I recognized a soul that reveled in the flame and excitement of sacrifice. In the tractability with which, at my wish, you forsook a study in which you were interested and adopted another because it interested me, in the untiring assiduity with which you have since persevered in it, in the unflagging energy and unshaken temper with which you have met its difficulties, I acknowledge the complement of the qualities I seek. Jane, you are docile, diligent, disinterested, faithful, constant, and courageous, very gentle, and very heroic. Cease to mistrust yourself. I can trust you. unreservedly. As a conductress of Indian schools and a helper among Indian women, your assistance will be invaluable to me.
My iron shroud contracted round me. Persuasion advanced with slow, sure step. Shut my eyes as I would, these last words of his succeeded in making the way, which had seemed blocked up, comparatively clear. My work, which had appeared so vague, so hopelessly diffuse, condensed itself as he proceeded and assumed a definite form under his shaping hand. He waited for an answer. I demanded a quarter of an hour to think before I again hazarded a reply.
Very willingly.
Rising, he strode a little different distance up the pass, threw himself down on a swell of heath and lay still.
I can do what he wants me to do. I am forced to see and acknowledge that. That is, if life be spared me. But I feel mine is not the existence to be long protracted under an Indian sun. What then? He does not care for that. When my time came to die, he would resign me in all serenity and sanctity to the God who gave me. The case is very plain before me. In leaving England, I should leave a loved but empty land. Mr. Rochester is not there, and if he were, what can that ever be to me? My business is to live without him now. Nothing so absurd, so weak as to drag on from day to day as if I were waiting some impossible change in circumstances which might reunite me to him. Of course, as St. John once said, I must seek another interest in life to replace the one lost. Is not the occupation he now offers me truly the most glorious man can adopt or God assign? Is it not by its noble cares and sublime results the one best calculated to fill the void left by uptorn affections and demolished hopes? I believe I must say, yes, and yet I shudder. Alas, if I join St. John and abandon half myself, if I go to India, I go to premature death. And how will the interval between leaving England for India and India for the grave be filled? Oh, I know well. That too is very clearly to my vision. By straining to satisfy St. John till my sinews ache, I shall satisfy him to the finest central point and farthest outward circle of his expectations. If I do go with him, if I do make the sacrifice he urges, I will make it absolutely. I will throw all onto the altar, heart, vitals, the entire victim. He will never love me, but he shall approve me. I will show him energies he has not yet seen, resources he has never suspected. Yes, I can work as hard as he can, and with as little grudging. Consent, then, to his demand is possible, but for one item, for one dreadful item. It is that he asks me to be his wife, and has no more of a husband's heart for me than that frowning giant of a rock down which the stream is foaming in yonder gorge. He prizes me as a soldier would a good weapon, and that is all. Unmarried to him, this would never grieve me, but can I let him complete his calculations coolly, put into practice his plans, go through the wedding ceremony? Can I receive from him the bridal ring, endure all the forms of love, which I doubt not he would scrupulously observe, and know that the spirit was quite absent? Can I bear the consciousness that every endearment he bestows is a sacrifice made on principle? No. Such a martyrdom would be monstrous. I will never undergo it. As his sister, I might accompany him. As his wife, I will tell him so.
I looked towards the knoll. There he lay, still as a prostrate column. His face turned to me, his eye beaming, watchful and keen. He started to his feet and approached me.
I am ready to go to India. if I may go free.
Your answer requires a commentary. It is not clear.
You have hitherto been my adopted brother, I your adopted sister. Let us continue as such. You and I better not marry.
He shook his head.
Adopted fraternity will not do in this case. If you were my real sister, it would be different. I should take you and seek no wife. But as it is, either our union must be consecrated and sealed by marriage, or it cannot exist. Practical obstacles oppose themselves to any other plan. Do you not see it, Jane? Consider a moment. Your strong sense will guide you.
I did consider, and still my sense, such as it was, directed me only to the fact that we did not love each other as man and wife should, and therefore it inferred we ought not to marry. I said so.
St. John, I regard you as a brother, you, me, as a sister. So let us continue.
We cannot. We cannot.
He answered with short, sharp determination.
It would not do. You have said you will go with me to India. Remember, you have said it.
Conditionally.
Well, to the main point, the departure with me from England, the cooperation with me in our future labors, you do not object? You have already as good as put your hand to the plow. You are too consistent to withdraw it. You have but one end to keep in view: how the work you have undertaken can best be done. Simplify your complicated interests, feelings, thoughts, wishes, aims. Merge all considerations in one purpose, that of fulfilling with effect, with power, the mission to your great master. To do so, you must have a coadjutor, not a brother that is a loose tie, but a husband. I too do want a sister. A sister might any day be taken from me. I want a wife, the sole helpmeet I can influence efficiently in life and retain absolutely till death.
I shuddered as he spoke. I felt his influence in my marrow, his hold on my limbs.
Seek one elsewhere than in me, St. John. Seek one fitted to you.
One fitted to my purpose, you mean fitted to my vocation? Again, I tell you, it is not the insignificant, private individual, the mere man with the man's selfish tastes. I wish to mate. It is the missionary.
And I will give the missionary my energies. It is all he wants, but not myself. That would be only adding the husk and shell to the kernel. For them, he has no use. I retain them.
You cannot. You ought not. Do you think God will be satisfied with half an oblation? Will he accept a mutilated sacrifice? It is the cause of God I advocate. It is under his standard I enlist you. I cannot accept on his behalf a divided allegiance. It must be entire.
No, I will give my heart to God. You do not want it.
I will not swear, reader, that there was not something of repressed sarcasm, both in the tone in which I uttered this sentence and in the feeling that accompanied it. I had silently feared St. John till now because I had not understood him. He had held me in awe because he had held me in doubt. How much of him was saint, how much mortal, I could not heretofore tell. But revelations were being made in this conference. The analysis of his nature was proceeding before my eyes. I saw his fallibilities. I comprehended them. I understood that sitting there where I did on the bank of heath, and with that handsome form before me, I sat at the feet of a man erring as I. The veil fell from his hardness and despotism. Having felt in him the presence of these qualities, I felt his imperfection and took courage. I was with an equal, one with whom I might argue, one whom, If I saw good, I might resist. He was silent after I'd uttered the last sentence, and I presently risked an upward glance at his countenance. His eye, bent on me, expressed at once stern surprise and quick, keen inquiry.
Is she sarcastic? And sarcastic to me?
It seemed to say.
What does this signify? Do not let us forget that this is a solemn matter,
He said ere long.
One of which we may neither think nor talk lightly without sin. I trust, Jane, you are in earnest when you say you will serve your heart to God. It is all I want. Once wrench your heart from man and fix it on your Maker, the advancement of that Maker's spiritual kingdom on earth will be your chief delight and endeavor. You will be ready to do at once whatever furthers that end. You will see what impetus would be given to your efforts and mine by our physical and mental union in marriage. The only union that gives a character of permanent conformity to the destinies and designs of human beings, and passing over all minor caprices, all trivial difficulties and delicacies of feeling, all scruple about the degree, kind, strength, or tenderness of mere personal inclination, you will hasten to enter into that union at once.
Shall I?
I said briefly, and I looked at his features, beautiful in their harmony, but strangely formidable in their still severity, at his brow commanding but not open, at his eyes bright and deep and searching, but never soft, at his tall, imposing figure, and fancied myself, in idea, his wife. Oh, it would never do. As his curate, his comrade, all would be right. I would cross oceans with him in that capacity, toil under eastern suns in ancient Asian deserts with him in that office, admire and emulate his courage and devotion and vigour, accommodate quietly to his masterhood, smile undisturbed at his ineradicable ambition, discriminate the Christian from the man, profoundly esteem the one and freely forgive the other. I should suffer often, no doubt, attached to him only in this capacity. My body would be under rather a stringent yoke, but my heart and mind would be free. I should still have my unblighted self to turn to, my natural, unenslaved feelings with which to communicate in moments of loneliness. There would be recesses in my mind which would be only mine, to which he never came, and sentiments growing there fresh and sheltered, which his austerity could never blight, nor his measured warrior march trample down. But as his wife, at his side always, and always restrained and always checked, forced to keep the fire of my nature continually low, to compel it to burn inwardly and never utter a cry, though the imprisoned flame consumed vital after vital, this would be unendurable.
St. John,
I exclaimed when I got so far in my meditation.
Well,
I repeat, I freely consent to go with you as your fellow missionary, but not as your wife. I cannot marry you and become part of you.
a part of me you must become. Otherwise, the whole bargain is void. How can I, a man, not yet 30, take out with me to India a girl of 19 unless she be married to me? How can we be forever together, sometimes in solitudes, sometimes amidst savage tribes, and unwed?
Very well. Under the circumstances, quite as well as if I were either your real sister or a man and a clergyman like yourself.
It is known that you are not my sister. I cannot introduce you as such. To attempt it would be to fasten injurious suspicions on us both. And for the rest, though you have a man's vigorous brain, you have a woman's heart. And it would not do.
It would do.
I affirmed with some disdain.
Perfectly well. I have a woman's heart, but not where you are concerned. For you, I have only a comrade's constancy, A fellow soldier's frankness, fidelity, fraternity, if you like. A Neophyte's respect and submission to his hyphen and nothing more. Don't fear.
It is what I want.
He said, speaking to himself.
It is just what I want, and there are obstacles in the way. They must be hewn down. Jane, you would not repent marrying me. Be certain of that. We must be married. I repeat it, there is no other way. And undoubtedly enough of love would follow upon marriage to render the union right, even in your eyes.
I scorn your idea of love.
I could not help saying as I rose up and stood before him, leaning my back against the rock.
I scorn the counterfeit sentiment you offer. Yes, St. John, and I scorn you when you offer it.
He looked at me fixedly, compressing his well-cut lips while he did so. Whether he was incensed or surprised or what, it was not easy to tell. He could command his countenance thoroughly.
I scarcely expected to hear that expression from you. I think I have done and uttered nothing to deserve scorn.
I was touched by his gentle tone and overawed by his high, calm mien.
Forgive me the word, St. John, but it's your own fault that I have been roused to speak so unguardedly. You have introduced a topic on which our natures are at variance, a topic we should never discuss. The very name of love is an apple of discord between us. If the reality were required, what should we do? How should we feel? My dear cousin, abandon your scheme of marriage. Forget it.
No, it is a long-cherished scheme, and the only one which can secure my great end. But I shall urge you no further at present. Tomorrow I leave for home for Cambridge. I have many friends there to whom I should wish to say farewell. I will be absent a fortnight. Take that space of time to consider my offer. And do not forget that if you reject it, it is not me you deny, but God. Through my means, he opens to you a noble career. As my wife only can you enter upon it. Refuse to be my wife, and you limit yourself forever to a track of selfish ease and barren obscurity. Tremble lest, in that case, you should be numbered with those who have denied the faith and are worse than infidels.
He had done. Turning from me, he once more looked to river, looked to hill. But this time his feelings were all pent in his heart. I was not worthy to hear them uttered. As I walked by his side homeward, I read well in his iron silence all he felt towards me. The disappointment of an austere and despotic nature which has met resistance where it expected submission. The disapprobation of a cool, inflexible judgment which has detected in another feelings and views in which it has no power to sympathise. In short, as a man, he would have wished to coerce me into obedience. It was only as a sincere Christian he bore so patiently with my perversity and allowed so long a space for reflection and repentance. That night, after he had kissed his sisters, he thought proper to forget even to shake hands with me, but left the room in silence. I, who, though I had no love, had much friendship for him, was hurt by the marked omission, so much hurt that tears started to my eyes.
I see you and St. John have been quarrelling, Jane, during your walk on the moor, but go after him. He is now lingering in the passage expecting you. He will make it up.
I have not much pride under such circumstances. I would always rather be happy than dignified, and I ran after him. He stood at the foot of the stairs.
Good night, St. John.
Good night, Jane.
Then shake hands.
What a cold, loose touch he impressed on my fingers. He was deeply displeased by what had occurred that day. Cordiality would not warm nor tears move him. No happy reconciliation was to be had with him. No cheering smile or generous word. But still the Christian was patient and placid, and when I asked him if he forgave me, He answered that he was not in the habit of cherishing the remembrance of vexation, that he had nothing to forgive, not having been offended. And with that answer, he left me. I would much rather he had knocked me down.
Yay, and we are done with our segment. Oh my gosh, I came into this not knowing any of you, and now I feel like we're best friends because we've gone through so much together. I do want to chat with all of you and hear your opinions and reactions to this. But first, I want to remind our viewers why we are doing this and putting ourselves out there emotionally like we just did. We are trying to raise funds to save the Honresfield Library and to bring those treasures, those literary treasures, to public display in the various museums and institutions that are being helped by the Friends of the National Libraries. We have a GoFundMe link that will be added below this video and I can go edit it. It is already in the description of our previous YouTube videos, along with a link to the Friends of the National Libraries Give Big campaign as well. So we appreciate anything you can give, whether it's dollars, pounds, pennies, or your voice in sharing our efforts here and the Bring the Brontes Home campaign, along with the Friends of the National Libraries. So thank you, readers, participants. This was fantastic. What do you want to say about this?
I forgot how much I love this book. I try to read it once every few years, but it's definitely due for a reread.
It's a lot. And I honestly couldn't look at you, Stephanie, as we were doing this because you were crying and I had to make you cry. And I didn't want to be crying as I was making you cry. But like, I sob the entire time when I'm reading this novel. I've gone through, I don't know how many boxes of Kleenexes, but a whole lot reading this and rereading it leading up to the readathon. What other things do you want to share, anyone?
That is just my favourite part of Jane Eyre. The pressure that Jane feels of St. John really gripping her and manipulating her, really, and the way that she expresses it, I think it's just amazing.
It's so good. And as I didn't prepare for this, and as I was reading it, I was just thinking, what's he thinking? What's he thinking? And I kept on thinking of Petruchio from The Taming of the Shrew and thinking, okay, I'll be him. But then I had a weird realization too, where I hadn't noticed before that he's probably thinking about marrying her much earlier than I originally thought. And so as we were saying it, and you were like at the inheritance revelation, I was like, oh, he's already thinking it. And so that was something that was really fun for me. You all did so great and brought so much to this. I'm so happy with it. And we're Bronte fans outside of this experience too. So what else do you want to share about what you love about with the Brontes?
Well, as I said, I'm writing about Emily's notebook. I've been working on Emily's poetry notebook since 2013, and all that time it's been missing. And it's just absolutely amazing that it's just suddenly come to light. And I feel so very, very, very strongly that it mustn't vanish again. It would be an absolute tragedy.
Did you suspect that it existed? Because
I knew that it existed. I knew that it was in that collection somewhere, but I didn't know what condition it was in. Didn't know exactly where it was or whether it would ever come to view again.
It's so fantastic. You'll get to be in the same room with it at some point.
And I was so excited. One of the pieces you highlighted is the annotated Bewick's History of British Birds. And that's actually, I've been looking for a copy of that for years because one of my favorite parts of the novel when I was a little girl was Jane hiding in that window seat and closing the curtains and just going off in this sort of imaginary land with all of these wonderful birds. And so I would love to get to see that and visit that at one point. I've loved just looking at the pictures, even in the auction website. Because it does give you sort of a window into this imaginary world she was creating. And these, the wonderful paintings that they describe her having done with the cormorant holding the necklace in its mouth and all of these images. So yeah, there are lots of wonderful treasures in this collection that I feel like it would be marvelous to get to explore for scholars and fans alike.
And the history of British birds, I'm so excited about that. I had to cry when I played Jane yesterday, and I was playing opposite my husband, and I'm sure I should have been thinking, he's hearing me say this right now, I should have been thinking about something romantic with him when I had to cry. But I was thinking about how I'm going to feel when I get to see the bird book, when it goes on display, and I just started sobbing. And like right now, it's getting to me too. So everyone who's watching, we all have very strong feelings about these treasures and about the Brontes and the other authors that are represented in this library. Burns, Austen, Scott. I can't even list all of them now because I'm choking up about the bird book. So we do appreciate all of your efforts to help contribute. Readers, I am so grateful to have met you and experienced this with you. You did just a fantastic job. I have readers jumping into our room for our next segment already that starts in 17 minutes. So I am going to run. I'm going to stop this live stream. Our Zoom will still stay open, but I'm going to stop live streaming for now. So thank you, everyone on YouTube. We'll see you again in 17